Alyssa, thank you so much for coming through. I appreciate you being here and accepting our invitation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. I think I told you that maybe a couple of times when we were going back and forth via email. I love your your writing style. I love your poems, the way that you perform them or when you share them. And when I first heard you perform, I was like, man, I gotta get her on. I gotta have her. And so when you accepted the invitation to be here, I was, um, I was pretty excited. So thanks again. How's your 2021 going so far? I know it's still relatively new into it, but how's that been so far?
Thanks. So it's been good. I have my challenges just like anybody else, staying home working with kids. I'm managing. I believe that, sometimes unfortunately, we need things to happen for us to look at things in a different perspective. So I'm making it.
I hear you, and I'm glad that you said that. And I know people who who regularly listen to the podcast will probably be like, "Man, don't say this again." But I feel the exact same way that you do. Like when everything started last year around this time with the pandemic, and people were like, "Oh man, what's going to happen? What's happening? I don't want to be quarantined. I don't want to be stuck in the house for however long." I think at first they were like 2 weeks, but it's just over time. To your point, like it's good to just relax, right? To settle down and just to take the time to be introspective and uh, not only discover who you are or realize who you are, but to improve on those things. And, you'll have an opportunity to discover things about yourself that you didn't know that are positive, and things that you didn't know about yourself that may not be as positive, and that gives us the opportunity to change. I know a lot of people don't like to look in the mirror and rather will be out and about on the go, keeping busy. And I know there are a lot of people that aren't able to handle what they see. So to your point, yeah, to be able to just sit back and get to know who you are is important.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah. So now I absolutely love your book, Growing Pains. And I want to talk a lot about your book during the course of this conversation. But for the listeners out there who, for whatever the reason, may not know who you are, I do want to just kind of go back and talk about your creative history, your writing history. And so you've been writing for about 15 years, right?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, have you always been writing poetry, or did you write in other forms?
I did always write poetry. Um, Now it's veering more off towards just writing because I can see that I do more than just poetry, which is was pretty amazing.
Yeah. So what was it about poetry that grabbed your attention, that really got you writing maybe more on a consistent basis?
The biggest part for me is that, I'm introverted, so I definitely don't express myself uh as much as other people vocally. So writing gave me an opportunity to just be myself without judgment, understanding that people are going to judge you regardless. But it was my safe space to just let all my feelings out. And the biggest push for me was to share it because I'm not the only person in the world who could feel the way I feel. So that's what kept me pushing through it, as well as healing. I use that as my coping mechanism to heal. So if I didn't feel comfortable speaking to other people about what I was going through at the time, that was my therapy.
And are you from a creative family?
In a way, yes, they were a bit artistic, but not to the point where I was surrounded by it. Like it's in my bloodline, but it's just something I just grew to do on my own.
And how were you introduced to poetry or writing in general? Do you remember?
Church. Yeah, I had to be, I was a teenager. I don't know how old I was, but my youth pastor at the time, he had played a spoken word piece by, I don't know who the gentleman was, but it was so powerful that I was just captivated and I was like, I want to do this. I had no idea how to. I was just like, you know what? I want to do that. And so even though I could not really write well, I started. I was just like rhyming small words. My poems didn't make much sense, but eventually I caught a little sense of flow, and I just kept to it.
Mm. Do you have, by chance, any of that old poetry that you started to write?
Oh my gosh. Uh, I do, but it's like, oh my, I don't know. I would not share it because some of it's like eek, like I would just, keep it to myself.
Well, in that context, do you think that there's bad poetry?
Hmm. I don't. And the reason why I say that is because every creative is different in their own way and it's coming from a place of authenticity. So, I mean, everyone has a different perspective. So, everyone might not like what you have to say or agree with it or understand it. And maybe that's why people think it could be bad. Maybe people could use a few pointers. Everyone could use some, but I don't think anything is bad necessarily.
Hmm. I agree with that. At least generally, we had a guest here. Well, let me take it back. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I agree with you wholeheartedly, not in general. But because I've asked that question for a while, and I have the same perspective that you do when it comes to poetry. When it comes to expressing yourself and sharing, or at least getting out what maybe frustrates you or makes you happy or whatever it may be. And because it's our own personal journey, that can't be bad. But I recently we had a guest, Poetic Serenity, who made a point to me that I didn't even think of, and she was saying how um, once it becomes unauthentic, once you are writing for or with ulterior motives, that for her that is then the poetry isn't good. And I thought that made a lot of sense, and I tended to agree uh with that point too. What do you think about that?
I do agree. I do agree. That's something that I I do live by, that you should always stay true to who you are, that you shouldn't, you know, to write something because you would want someone to like it. You write
Right.
something because it represents you and your experiences.
Yes. And one thing that a couple of things that I've learned about you while I was doing my research on you is, one, you are very authentic and it shows through your work. And also, you are a believer in self love and being confident in who you are and how unique you are and how you should embrace that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just going back a little bit, you mentioned how poetry was therapy. You used it for healing purposes. You also said that you are introverted, as I am naturally. I think that over the years, I've learned to pick up traits where I can be more extroverted in certain situations if I have to be. It takes energy, but naturally, I'm an introvert. But then you said that you decided that you wanted to share, or maybe that you needed to share your work, just because, as you mentioned, there are other people who are like, logically, there are other people who are experiencing the same feelings and thoughts that you were. So being an introvert and then deciding that you needed to share your work, how was the process for you from writing for yourself, for for healing, to sharing your work with people that you didn't know?
Wow, that was a scary process, but it was a good scary process. So I used to be so terrified of like speaking in front of people. So like writing is it's not I'm not going to say it's easy, but it was just something for me. That was just my thing until I was like, you know what, my this is really good. Like I feel like I really need to share it, and not just for people to like me or to recognize me, but to share that emotion because it's like you connect with people on a deeper level. So I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so scared to share this. I would go up on stage and I would be like shaking. So it definitely took some time. So I think I just pushed myself to get out of that introverted shell because like I could be connecting with another introvert who's too afraid to share their feelings. You never know. So it just took a lot of courage and believing in myself that I can do this. You're more than your fears of speaking in front of people. Don't worry about what they think of you. You're being authentic. And it's like whoever is, true to themselves will naturally be drawn to you because you are authentic. So I just kept doing it. And I've grown comfortable. I still get little butterflies in my stomach. They don't go away. It's just like excitement. But it's a different excitement now.
Yeah, I know exactly how you feel, because like even with this podcast, like I don't know if, I don't know if you heard, but like right before we started recording, I took this deep breath. There was this sigh, and I've talked to a lot of different creatives, but each creative is different, and um, so I still get nervous when I talk to someone, and but it's a good feeling. Like I feel like if there's ever a time when I'm not nervous or when I don't feel that butterfly feeling, then something's wrong, right? So, but you mentioned how nervous you were, and how being introverted was difficult for you to start to share. So tell me how it was the first time that you performed. What was that experience like? Can you walk us through what that what that maybe what that day was like, or maybe not the whole day, but like before you decided to get on stage for the first time to share?
Wow, so let's see. I definitely had some difficulty remembering it. I know that it's not something that's necessary, but me for personally, I like, and this is coming from an egotistical side of myself, I like to be more of like I like to leave a good impression. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't stumble over my words, so I would practice in the mirror. I would forget some things, so I really had to be like, you know what, relax, breathe, just be yourself. Yeah, I might have, stumbled over a couple of things, but the practice made it work, and I did memorize it. But it was like, I guess in some ways I'm a perfectionist.
Yeah.
So that's what also pushed me because it could be good and bad. In this way, it was good, but it was good. I got lots of positive feedback and it made me want to do it again. So yeah.
I think at least what I've noticed as a creative and talking to other creatives and being around different creatives for, however long I've been around creatives, we all seem to be perfectionists. Like we want to make sure that what we write or how we express it is well perfect, and that obviously can extend past what we're creating, but and if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't sound right, if it doesn't look right, it's, at least for me, it's not uncommon for me to tear up the piece of paper and start again. And so I imagine, because I'm not a performance poet, but to go on stage and uh, share in front of a bunch of different people or people that I don't know, yeah, I can definitely see how you want to make sure that you take your time and you want to make sure. I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like you have to be in a zone when you're up there. Like you have to have a different mental. You have to go to a different like place mentally, because I imagine if you're on stage, you can't like realize what's going on. And I don't know if that makes sense, but like if you ever saw the old like Bugs Bunny cartoons or the Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner cartoons, where they are chasing whomever and then they run over a cliff. They can run and run and run for however long they're going to run for with nothing underneath them. But once they boom, but once they realize what's happening, like once they realize that they're not on ground anymore, and they look down and they recognize that this is the reality of the situation, that's when they fall. And so I imagine when you're on stage that as long as you're in that zone, that you are focused on sharing your work, connecting with the people that are in the audience, you're good. But when you realize that, oh shit, I'm on stage and everybody's looking at me and everybody's listening to every word that I say, then it's like fumbling over words, you get nervous, you start shaking. Is
Right.
that right?
It is. I've prepared myself to have. I started off like, okay, I gotta have an alter ego because I've asked before I did it. I asked someone close to me and was like, "How do you not get nervous?" And she was just like, "Have an alter ego." So I was like,
Mm.
you know what? That's a really good idea. So I was like, okay, my alter ego is gonna be super confident, gonna be extroverted. I mean, yeah, worked a little bit, but then just like you said, like I was like, oh man, all of these people are actually listening to everything that I'm saying. And so my brain is like reciting this poem, but at the same time, it's like I kind of froze. Like, and I hope I was like, I hope they didn't see that pause, but I'm gonna make it a part of my poem. So I was just like, you know what? Okay, what was my next line? But yeah, honestly, that's how it is, and it's like you
Yeah.
have to flow with it, and you have to learn to be comfortable. And I just like stared at the light on the ceiling, like I lock eyes with the wrong person, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh man, they're looking at me,
What are they thinking, right?
right? So I was like, I guess sometimes I gotta like I'm working on this where, I make eye contact with not just one person, but I scam the room. So I
Mm.
don't become nervous because that one person is just looking at me. So I'm working on it. I'm getting better. It's a process.
I imagine.
Hmm.
I imagine so, and so yeah, that's what I that's what I've always kind of thought it was like, and so I think you're the first person that's ever confirmed that for me. So thank
You're
you.
welcome.
So thank you very much. Well, that's really cool that you're able to adapt. When you said that that pause wasn't supposed to be there, but I'm gonna go with it.
Right.
So I imagine being flexible and adapting to whatever happens. You have to be prepared for that. You have to know what to do next, even though you may not know what's going to happen, right? Like you didn't expect there to be that pause, but mentally you were like, okay, well, I guess that's, I guess that's part of the, part of the performance.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just go with it.
Listening to you, not in this particular conversation, but in a conversation I've heard you have before, I realized that you and I have some things in common. Like growing up, my dad wasn't around, and my mom was in and out of rehab for addiction issues, and there was a point in time where personally I had to let go of some of the hostility or a lot of the hostility and anger that I was feeling during that time because, I realized that I wasn't growing. It was stunting my growth. And like I said, I've heard you talk about growing up in a similar circumstance or similar circumstances as a creative, a writer, a poet, has it affected like going through that growing up? Has that affected the way that you write or the way that you communicate?
Absolutely. So that situation actually, it's been tough, growing up, single parent home, but it actually got a little worse when I was in my early 20s. My mom developed an addiction. And although I was no longer a child, I still had a bit of trauma that I already carried. And then that was something else that I didn't really understand. So it was tough because I had a child of my own. So in some ways I was still a wounded child, even though I had one. I wasn't aware that I needed to heal. Or else I'd carry that same wounding to my own child. So yeah, it's the writing has helped me cope. Um, it's been very emotional
Mm.
to say the least because I've been facing a lot of emotions that I didn't know were there. Um, which is healthy because I'm understanding not only myself, but I'm also understanding my mother because it's as if, those ancestral traumas are like carried down. So whatever your parents go through, you end up being a part of it unconsciously. And so I understood her more and I had a bit more compassion because of what I went through too. So it helps a lot.
I think that's a great point that you made about ancestral trauma and how that affects us because it's well there was a lot of substance in what you said. So we make decisions and choices based off of the experiences that we have or how we grow up because we don't know any better. We're ignorant to different, and so when we make choices and we make decisions, they lead to situations which then require additional choices and additional decision making. and they compound, right? And so it gets to a point where, and you mentioned this when it comes to your writing, or when it comes to writing in poetry or writing poetry, how when we write and we're authentic, we tap into some emotions and thoughts and feelings that, like you said, we didn't even know that were there. And it's like, at least for me, I buried a lot of different things and a lot of emotions. It was like, okay, I can't care about this because, you know, if I allow it to consume me, it's going to overwhelm me, and I won't be able to function the way that I need to function to make sure my sister and I are taken care of. You know what I mean? And so, as a young person, and we may not know any other way to move past or to let go, especially when it comes to that that animosity or that frustration or that anger towards a parent.
Mhm.
We bury it, we hide it, we pretend that it's not there, and we do things to keep ourselves busy so we don't have to focus on what emotions we're feeling at that time. And yeah, like, it shows through my writing, things that I may not necessarily share with other people, on personal writing. And it's amazing to see and to discover different things about myself and how it's affected decisions that I've made. It allows, for me anyway, it allowed me to see that there was a pattern that I had subconsciously, like I didn't even realize I was doing it. Did, did, is that how it was for you? And maybe not that exact the way that I said it necessarily, but is that kind of how you felt, or what you saw when you saw what was coming out when you were writing?
Absolutely. I would, get out my anger that way. Like, I have this poem, it's not yet released, but it's called If My Mother Was Perfect.
Mm.
So, I wrote down all the things that I felt like she could have done better as a mother. Then I looked at myself. There was that was one part of healing, was getting over those traumas that I didn't heal from as a kid. Then I looked at myself as a parent and I was like, you know what? I I may not be doing the exact thing that she was doing, but there's a lot of similarities there. And so I was like, you know
Mm.
what, man, like, yeah, like that's the compassion part. Like that trauma becomes you as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I was like, you know what? The forgiveness part had to come in because I was like, I'm not, I got my imperfections just as much as she does. We all do, because that's what we were taught, like you said. So I'm like, you know what? The anger, that it was still a little bit there, but I looked at her as a person, just like I'm a person, and I was like, you know what? I'm working on myself. I'm gonna do better in the areas that I didn't get, so I can be a better parent to my kids because of the reason why I didn't have that parenting. So it was a lot of self-reflection. Um, so so yeah, it's helped build me up as a person better. Growing pains, growing through your pain, it was a chance for me to really learn from all the traumatic experiences that I've been through so my kids don't have to go through it.
Yeah. I like that process, though, what you did when it came to writing down what she could have done differently. And then, I don't know if you then, at that point, decided to use that as a reference to judge or to well, maybe judge is too strong of a word, but I can't think of another word right now. But how you are as a parent and realizing how difficult it can be to do these things that you wrote down. Because, right, it does at that point, it does result in or should result in compassion. You realize how difficult it is to change when you talk about, again, that when you talk about that trauma that's passed down from generation to generation. I know for me, it wasn't quite like that, but in a way, it was in within the same context because, like, I had used her mistake as a lesson for me or as motivation for me to not go down that same path. And I would remember saying all the time, like, I wouldn't do this and I wouldn't do that because I don't want to become dependent on something and not be able to make conscious decisions and be accountable for what it is that I do. And I didn't realize it, but for a while, but at some point, and I remember it, I got to the point where I was like, wait a minute, the reason why I don't want to do this, as far as like the result of the type of addiction that my mom had, um, she succumbed to that, or she was a victim of that. She was, um, she was sick. And so for me, that was when my compassion then kicked in because I'd been so angry and so frustrated beneath the surface, but it was still there. There was still that tension. But it wasn't until that moment when I realized that it was a sickness and that, you can become a victim to it. I mean, you still have a responsibility to want to do better and to put forth that effort once you realize that things have to change or should change. But that's where my compassion level kicked in. That's when I looked at myself and said, okay, well, I need to do better to be more understanding and be more sympathetic and to help in any way that I can. So that way, and I wasn't a parent at that time, but so whenever I become a parent, I can whatever the result of that is, I could apply that to how I parent.
Right.
So, yeah. So I appreciate how you did that. And,
Thank you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that was really cool. So I do want to talk about Growing Pains. I said earlier that I loved the book. So essentially there are, and I loved how you did this too, but there were three chapters, past, present, and future. And so when I was reading the book, I got a almost like a theme for each of the chapters. And like, so past, for example, for me, reading the poems that you included in that chapter was like acknowledgement, meaning that, okay, I recognize that these issues are happening. And and for those who haven't read the book, the past really talks about your previous relationships.
Mm. Yep.
And it was, to me, I got the sense you were acknowledging that these issues exists within these relationships, that you grew to understand what was what was wrong, and I love the authenticity. And I mentioned that earlier in this conversation, but I love the authenticity because it really shines through in the entire book, and it was well done. It was well written. I loved how you're open with those observations that I mentioned earlier, and how you use them to guide your decisions. Like I loved Letter to My Exes. I thought that was a great piece.
Thank you.
I love that piece. I loved Autumn. So just kind of talk about first of all how that book came to be. I know that it was about a year or a little bit more than a year for you to complete the book, right?
Correct. It was about a year.
Yeah. So just talk about the book itself and why you decided to write it.
So at the time, so hold on a minute. So before I wrote the book, I had just gone through so many things, and I was not in a conscious state to really write about it. I wasn't ready to face those feelings of mine. Um, I had worked with someone at the time, it was a call center. She shared that she had published her own book and she self-published it. So I was like, really? I've been thinking about it, but I don't know. She's like,
Yeah.
well, here you go. Here's my book, let me know what you think. And so I read it and I was so inspired because I was like, here's another creative that I just connected with. She shared her her poems with me, and they're not just poems, they're like parts of herself. And I was like, I admired that about her so much. And it really encouraged me. And she talked to me. She was like, why don't you do that? I was like, you know what? I need to, because I felt like it was a push to be like, hey, if this person can do it and she was also introverted, then you could do it. So that was one person. There was a second person that I knew was also a woman, and she was also she was not as introverted as me, but she wasn't as so extroverted about sharing her work, but she did it. She was like, you know what, share your work, publish it. So there I had all these people pushing me to share it. Even the people that I worked with, there was a young lady, she was like, you know what, you got a lot to share. So it was just so many signs that I was being sent to do it. And that at the time, emotionally, I was at like a breaking point. Like I was okay. My mental health wise, I was good. But emotionally, I was just like, you know what, I just need to get it out. I need to write about what I've gone through. And I was just like, okay, I'm growing through my pain right now. And so the following year, because it was published November 2019, all 2020 was a growth spurt, growing through everything that I wrote about, which was kind of ironic, but at the same time, I feel like I was setting my intentions for the following year. So that was how it all started.
Yeah. And so what was the process like? I heard you say that there were times where you were writing two or three poems at a time when you were writing that book. How many of the or how maybe not the exact number, but how many of the pieces that are in the book were poems that you had written before, uh, versus how many were new, or were they all new poems?
I believe there were only about two old poems. The other ones were all new. They were just, I was getting them out. I
Yeah.
would start some, not finish it, jump to another one. So I was just like jumping around. Some I would finish quicker than others. Others I was just like, man, I need some time.
Hmm.
So yeah.
So talk about the chapter past. What was that like going through your old relationships and writing down or getting out what the experiences were like I said, I loved letter to my exes because of the the honesty that was in that particular piece. Well, yeah. So just if you don't mind, just talk about the chapter past and what that was like writing that.
Sure. So it was just me self-reflecting on my experiences. It came from a place of who I used to be on my growth, on my journey of growth. I really had to figure out what went wrong, how I could learn from it, and how I could do better from that experience. So I had to really pull apart the things that happened, how I played a part in it, what I felt, what the other person did to me that made me feel that way. So I was really dissecting those hidden parts that I wasn't ready to face before. So that was the biggest part of it.
And when you were writing those pieces to include in the book, and you revisited those old relationships, um, from an emotional standpoint, was it to a point where you were maybe at a point where you weren't necessarily taken back to those situations emotionally, so it was easier for you to write them? Or when you went back, were you taken back emotionally at the same time?
A little bit of both.
Mm,
I be, I believe it depended on the experience that I had. There was one that I actually cried when I wrote it. There was a few, but in the past chapter, I believe it's called Promises. I think that's in the past chapter, but it was basically remembering a traumatic relationship, a toxic relationship. Um, and I was brought back emotionally. That
mm,
really, it's like I kind of relived it. And I had to in order for me to be coming from a place of authenticity.
mm-hmm.
That poem was real quick and easy. It was short and to the point. But I was just, randomly, sometimes you just think of things like I may have been triggered that day, and it could have really brought all those emotions back to me, and I was just like, you know what? I really need to get it out so I don't emotionally hoard it for another day or two or week. And so after I wrote it, I felt good. Um, the others, Letter to My Exes, it wasn't as emotional, but it addressed a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can we, can there be another chance for us or no? And this is why. This is me clearing up any questions, whether they read it or not. It was something for me. That was my closure to them. I'm putting that energy out there into the universe and saying, listen, no, it's not going to work out again because this is where it fell short, and that's it. And I'm moving on. So, so yeah, I faced the hardest emotions, the easiest ones, some with ease, some, with, those uncomfortable feelings too.
And I heard Letter to My Exes was your favorite poem in the past chapter.
Absolutely, it was.
Yeah. What I also liked about that group of poems is you were, and for, correct me if I'm wrong, but when I was reading 1 a.m., it felt like you were acknowledging you were acknowledging your vulnerability that you still possessed in that particular piece where, and I'm trying to make sure that I remember it correctly, but it was more of, I when I think back to, like the last time that we were together was this type of experience, but you weren't ready to give me what I needed. You weren't in the place where I am or was. And so, because of that, this isn't going to work. Is that
Exactly. That's
okay?
exactly what it was. Yep.
Yeah, so I love the fact that there was that letter to my exes like, hey, this isn't going to work, and so this is where it lies. But then at the same time later on, and again 1 a.m., you acknowledge that, hey, I still feel this particular way, whether it was about one particular person or maybe all of them, I'm not sure, but and then I love how you closed it with with closure. I mean, that was the name of the.
Yeah.
that was
I intentionally did that.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was the name of the piece, and I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, what about present? Like, so when I talked a little bit about like a theme and that I got, and while the entire book it represents strength, I think that present chapter really brought that home. And the first poem in the present chapter, I Am a Poet, I think that ranks right up there with Letter to My Exes, just because I felt like that was the perfect transition piece, like from past to present. Like, I loved how you were explaining, seemingly to the past, who you grew into, like who you had become, right?
Mhm.
And you were like letting, quote unquote, the past know what's coming. Like, hey, I I'm a poet and I express things, and this is how I'm going to do it. It was almost like you were, in a way, you're warning them, like
Right.
this, like this is where I'm at now. So beware. So
Mhm.
talk about the present chapter and what that was like writing.
So that so it was more of who I am today when I wrote it. So past was more of like, yeah, I was hurt. I made some bad decisions, but that's not me today. Me today is being more conscious of me, accepting me, telling the world who I am was like a reintroduction that I'm not all pain and bad decisions. I have gifts to share. I have hopes and dreams, and I'm gonna let you know that I am more than what you think I am. So that's where a lot of the poems came from.
And what I also liked about the way that you wrote the poems in present is you, I don't quite know how to express it, but you didn't refer to, at least I didn't get the sense that you referred to your previous pain to support your growth or where you were. I felt like your poems in present was strictly, this is where I'm at. And I guess to give that more context, like when I write, and this is what I've uh seen, like when I write about growth or transformation or maturity, I realize that in that piece, I always seem to focus on the trauma, right? I mentioned, I mentioned where I was and how I may have grown. The growth isn't independent. Like I always attach the past to it. It's almost like I'm focusing on it, whereas your pieces in present, again, they like stand alone. Like, this is where I'm at, and this is how I'm moving forward. And you left the specific traumas or the trauma in, and no pun intended, in the past, right?
Mhm.
And so in the chapter, and like, so was that intentional? Did you make sure that you were only talking about where you are in that chapter and didn't really mention the past?
I did. So, it was like I played around. In my mind, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do, past, present, future. My past is more of the pain aspect that I've learned from. The present is like, okay, I'm gonna write a bunch of stuff that represents who I am today. It was confusing like to put them in the proper places, but it ended up working out. But you're correct. I want to just solely focus on myself and who I was growing to be. That I was more than just the hurt person that I wrote about in the past.
Mhm.
Hmm.
That was a much better description than what I just gave.
It's okay. I understood.
What I also liked about the present and the poems that are in that chapter is it shows that you understood the lessons from the past, because in the poems in the present chapter, you talk about, or you write about, what now is required for future relationships. It's like you understand what you need, what has to be there in order for you to for in order for the relationship to contribute to the happiness that you have, right? Because now it's about self-love and about not relying on a relationship or someone in the relationship to make you happy, or to um or to justify who you are, right? And so,
Correct.
yeah, it felt like, well, no, it didn't feel like you stated, what needs to be there for a relationship to be successful.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So I really dug that. And like I said, I like how you were able to do that, because it's for me anyway, it's difficult to not include the trauma in my growth pieces, and that's actually where I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to get to your level. Uh
Gotcha.
yeah. Now the future is is where I was most impressed, because what I got from that was, not only did you, so now it's putting it all together, right? So you had the past, the trauma in the past, the lessons that you had to learn, the present. Okay, so now this is where I'm at. This is now what I need from a significant other. Now the future is, okay, so now putting it all together, I want to implement the past and the present to have this type of relationship in the future. And in those pieces, you acknowledge, you recognize how the trauma from the past can affect your future relationships.
Absolutely.
So talk about writing the future. What was that like? Because I mean, it's obviously something that had, or maybe it has, I don't know your status, but it hasn't happened yet, right? So It's what you ultimately want. So talk about how it was writing the future chapter.
So the future was me like really talking to my past self, um, with the present knowledge I had,
Yeah.
and trying to change my future in a sense, or set myself up for what I really wanted, and how I wanted my life to be different. So it was more of I'm aware of all these things that happened to me. I accept who I am and what happened. And with all that being said, how are we gonna move forward? We're not gonna go backwards. It's like, what am I setting myself up for? Coming into these new chapters of growth. So a lot of them were, short, straight to the point, long, um, still addressing those uh, painful memories, but from a different perspective of growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the point where you acknowledge that what's happened in my past can affect my, the future relationships. I don't think a lot of people are able to recognize and acknowledge it, right? Because they think that because we are who we are right now, that the past, while it may not dictate who we are going to be, especially if we're conscious of the decisions that we make, and we make decisions based off of the lessons that we've learned consciously, and we're consciously thinking and being mindful of it, that that it won't affect. They don't real people don't realize that if we aren't intentional with uh implementing the lessons that we've learned in the future, whatever situation it is or whatever decisions that we have to make, that it can affect it.
Absolutely.
So I thought that was great, and so I recommend, like, people who haven't gotten growing pains, that they absolutely do. What has been the reaction to your book from people that you know, people that you don't know? What typically has been the feedback that you've gotten?
So, mainly from women, I got a sense of understanding, like, wow, you feel like that too? Or wow, I remember going through this too. I had shared some content. It wasn't written in the book, but I did a video about, being the child of an addict, and it it a woman had messaged me. She was just like, you know what? You really said everything I would have never been able to put words into. So, I take a few things from the book, and then I, expand on it in other ways. That's from women. From men, I get a sense of, wow, you really brought me back to when I was younger, if it's in like an older gentleman, or how, he can understand a woman's mind better. I've had a few gentlemen read it and say that they can now see the other side of the story,
Mm-hmm.
because they only see their side sometimes. I mean, it happens, we're only human, but coming from a woman, they're like, wow, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I understand it now. Just from a book. Even my ex, uh, he was like, "Did you really write that about me?" I'm like, "I mean, what makes you feel like I did?"
Right. Yeah.
Was I really like that? I was like, "Well, I suppose that I did my job as a writer because I took you to that place
Right.
that you prevented yourself from facing. So I did my job."
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
um, that's funny. So you also do motivational speeches. You're a motivational speaker. When did you decide to do that, or what got you into that space?
Me healing.
Mm,
Um, I do know that in order to help other people and to heal other people, you have to first heal and help yourself. That's one of the most toughest decisions and processes, which is it's a daily process. It doesn't just happen overnight because you still struggle with these thoughts and emotions that have been, programmed into you from childhood. But I was like, I want to help other people get through what I got through. We all need each other. And so I was like, all of this motivational stuff to pep myself up to be more positive shouldn't just be kept to myself. I want to share creatively, and I do this creatively. So I might say, you know what, you're a great person, you're beautiful, but it comes out so much better when I write it in a creative form.
hmm
So that's another avenue that will definitely be expanded. Like it's steps to it. So it's like, let me introduce who I was growing, what I learned from it, and how I can help someone else grow through their pain too. So that's the motivational aspect of my creative work.
So, being an introvert, as you mentioned earlier, how has the transition been to being someone comes to for that motivation, or to assist someone who may feel a certain way, to get them to view things or to see things or to feel things differently? Is it the same like when you were talking about writing? Like it was like, okay, this is what I have to do. And so, or performing, okay, this is what I have to do. Let me put on that, that, that alter ego, to at least get me through assisting someone, because it's typically by default not my nature.
Right. It was a complete opposite. Um, and I say that because you take a big step in writing. It's
Mm-hmm.
another big step in sharing,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't just share it. You have to like really put power into how you really share your work.
Right.
It came from a place of vulnerability. And I believe that when other people see how vulnerable you are, and not just telling your business, but sharing what you learned through that experience, it it helps them lower their guard down in a sense and say, wow, well, I really feel you. Like, I didn't know that there was other people that felt like I did. And so they thank me. Like I am surprised sometimes because there would be strangers who would inbox me and say, you know what, keep doing well. Like you really touched me. And I'm like, really? And so the
Yeah.
introvert in me is like, well, it's a good thing that you came out of your shell because you're not just doing it for you. Collectively, you're helping others because you're changing the atmosphere. It's like you're changing the consciousness of not only yourself, but other people who listen and read. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, like I'm doing like it does something for me, like that philanthropist kind of
Yeah.
vibe. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, like yes, they read it and I felt good, but it felt even better to know that I helped someone in some
Yeah.
way because they had to be vulnerable with me as much as I was vulnerable with them. So at the end, it's like we're helping each other.
Yes.
Mhm.
I know there's a piece in your book. I don't remember if it's called Humble or Humility, one of those two. But as a creative, just from the perspective that you gave and the context that you gave it, uh, is there that humility, that humbleness as maybe an introvert? Like you recognize that your writing affects people, right? Like you know that because you've heard that, but when or where you sharing your work has helped people, but when you get those DMs or the emails that really expounds on how you've helped them and you feel like, wow, I did that. How uh, how important is that to you? And from a humility standpoint, do you ever maybe question how powerful your words are and how it, how it can affect people?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I have to go back and read my work as someone else
Mm,
because, as artists, like you said earlier, we can be perfectionists,
mm-hmm,
but to someone else, just the way how raw you are and how authentic you are could really hit an emotional spot with them, because you're so vulnerable.
mm-hmm.
Um, that's the biggest part of it. Yeah, it's the
Yeah,
biggest part.
yeah. Now, oh, before I go into that, earlier in the conversation, you talked about how you are writing in different ways, in different formats. So, talk about that a little bit, how you've expanded your creative flow.
So before it was just like poetry, it had to rhyme. Now, like naturally, I just rhyme. Like I don't know why. Sometimes even when I speak, I rhyme. It just become a
Yeah.
part of my life. Um,
Have you ever gotten like when I talk sometimes, I know what you mean. Like when I talk sometimes, I told you earlier that I have a well off air that I have an 8-year-old daughter, right? And so um I'll be talking and she'll be like, "Hey, that rhymed."
yeah, I when I'm talking to my kids, and I'm, disciplined or whatever, I pause and I'm like, wow. Even my daughter's like, Mom, you rhymed. I'm like, I know, but that's not what we're trying to get here. So it just becomes a part of my nature because I just did it so much.
Like, are you yelling at me in a poem as a
Yeah, and
poem?
she was like, "Wait a minute, Mom, are you speaking a poem?" Like I'm giving her some motivational tips. My 9-year-old, she's like, "Is that a poem, Mom?" I'm like, "Okay, that's real funny, but no."
Right.
But yeah, it kind of came out of the poetry. It still is, but more of prose. So I just write like, and eventually I'll be, coming into a book, like a novel, and just writing because I write, but it needs to be more organized because my thoughts are just everywhere sometimes.
Yeah.
So like, okay, this is gonna take some time. Poetry sometimes is easier to get out. It takes time regardless, but when you're actually writing, you have to be very meticulous about,
Hmm.
how you want your story to go. So that's gonna be fun, as it always is.
Right. You're right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I imagine so because poetry, you're just letting things out, right? You're just flowing with whatever you're feeling or whatever you're thinking or whatever it is that you want. Where as in other formats and other forms, right, you do have to be more meticulous. You do have to be more thoughtful and more intentional
Mhm.
to be able to express it the way that you want it to be expressed. So I got you. I got you.
Right.
All right, so I know that you have agreed to share some of your work. So you're gonna share a couple of your pieces for us today. So I am going to step off of this virtual stage and allow you to do your thing.
Okay. So I'll start off with solitude thoughts. Okay. I like things that give me goosebumps. Hair standing on my skin on end. Make my taste buds water like awaken my soul type. Third eye like Sunday morning praise. Yes, Lord, head nod and hand wave like poetic prose. Soul snaps. Releasing energy. Climax. Butterflies in my stomach as I hide the fact that there is no way around my all or nothing. No grays, only white or black. Too familiar with the space left between me and solitude. I look at myself and say there is no me without you. They don't know you the way I do, so what's the use of trying to find replacements to fill your shoes? You're the best you'll ever have, and anyone who has the privilege of sharing your energy should only raise vibes and ignite the fire of soulful intimacy. Having already been complete, help me understand the math of how two half incomplete people make a whole when they take pieces of each other just to fill each other's holes. How does one live when the other one goes? A connection is eternal, but attachment drains the soul. See, I've always wanted to find the one with hopes of this could be it, so he's like that, but I need him to be like this. It always seems as if that's as far as it always goes. When you're unsure of what the future holds, the uncertainty of settling for his comfort zones doesn't give me a fear of commitment. More like I'd regret a waste of time when I could be with someone who appreciates and reciprocates and doesn't treat me like his boo, but his wife. So I'll take comfort in my own soul's lullabies. Me time with glasses of wine any day over his lies and why he never replied. In a world full of artificial hearts that only lead you between legs. Temptation from the left because loneliness led the way. Avoiding feelings as if they were STDs, and when you catch them, the antidote is ghosting. See, sometimes I wish my forehead read authentics only because my soul has no vacancies for ego, only solitude and positive energy.
Wow. And if I'm not mistaken, that is your favorite piece from Present.
Correct.
Yeah. Why is that?
It addressed a lot of codependent tendencies that I had within myself, and I couldn't acknowledge that until I was in my own solitude. So that was like a bunch of thoughts that I could only get out if I was by myself without being codependent on somebody else.
And we do tend to fall into that codependency type of mode when we are in relationships with people that we want to fulfill something that we're searching for or that we're missing. So, yeah, I love that piece.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for sharing that. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so I'm going to step back. I know you have another one that you want to share. So,
Okay. So this one is the other side of the bed. I've always been the type to like my space so I don't feel crowded, like needing to write when I feel the clutter of thoughts in my head. But somehow the mess always ends up on the other side of the bed. See, having so much space is freeing, yet lonely at the same time. Sometimes when I'm watching a romance flick, I'm wishing someone was holding me from behind. But instead of dwelling on the emptiness, I find things to replace it with out of laziness. Makeup bag hidden under the purple towel, black leggings and a top for tomorrow, wife beater, white blazer I keep forgetting to wash, water bottle, lotion, two pairs of gold hoop earrings, and a black lace bra. Ironically, the other side of the bed has become the designated space I need for everything that can be found easily. You know, it just makes me think, why isn't it that easy for me to just reach over in the middle of my sleep to someone I'll call home? Instead of the pillows I drown my thoughts in, the cold I cover up in with layers and layers of blankets, and how the TV watches me sleep instead of me watching it. I bet if the walls of my room could speak, they tell you stories about how the other side has only been filled with comfort that's temporary, how there is no substitution for authenticity, and trying to live your life vicariously through movies will never give you a fairy tale ending. They tell you about the nights I'd stare at nothing for hours, trying to figure out exactly how did I get here. When your leopard print pillows only make your bed look pretty, the absence of connections sinks its teeth deep into your dream of the one. So the other side of the bed becomes the enemy you love, covered up and untouched, with a sign that reads reserved, like the outside of an empty bus seat. Not because it's taken, it just hasn't been filled by the right body.
Whoa. It's amazing, man. I love your work. I love
Thank
your
you.
work. So, is Growing Pains going to be your only poetry book?
Nope, that was just the beginning.
Yeah, more to share.
So much more.
So, yeah, got you, got you. All right. Well, I don't want to keep you too long. So, yo, this man, this hour and 20 minutes has gone by really, really fast. So, two more questions before I'll let me go. Where can people find you?
So I do have Facebook. My poetry page is Alyssa Speaks. I do have Instagram. I'm also on Instagram as Alyssa Speaks. I'm on Clubhouse as well as Alyssa Speaks. I am working on my personal website at the moment, so that's not out there just yet. But when it is, I'll definitely announce it.
Cool. Now, how is Clubhouse? I've heard of Clubhouse. I'm team Android allegedly. So
Mhm.
I've had a couple of people invite me, but because I don't have a iPhone or whatever, I can't access it. So what is that like?
So basically, it's like a platform where, I mean, for me, I only connect with people who are, artists, poets. You can connect with other like-minded individuals. Everyone uses it for different reasons, but it's just like a networking platform. I go into rooms that they have for poetry.
Mhm.
So say if, someone follows me and I follow them back, it just shows you like the rooms that they go into. So, I get notifications on my phone and that makes it easier for me to network because I see what other people are doing too. So, so yeah, it's been working out for me pretty well. I'm telling you, my viewers on Instagram has grown because you can't just use it for other people to follow you. You have to follow back and you have to support other people. That's the thing about,
Oh yes.
being an artist. I've seen people who just ask, "Hey, can you support me? Like my stuff, buy my stuff," and it's one-sided. I've I started out my poetry with people who were I felt that they were so much better than me, but they're so
Hmm.
focused on their own work. I
Mm-hmm.
noticed that, and I don't say anything because, everyone has a different perspective. But at the end of the day, we're supposed to be supporting each other as a community.
That's
And
it. That's it.
I feel like if that's the best way to get people to support you is just to support them the same, you know?
Yeah, I do. I like that. All right, cool. All right. And then finally, will you come back? Will you come back to talk to us some more about poetry, about writing, about creativity, about your new poetry book when that comes out, about your new novel when that comes out, all of that stuff?
Absolutely. This was amazing. It was dope. It was deep. It's conscious. I'd be happy to come back.
Thank you so much. I'm glad that you enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed it too. Again, I'm glad that you accepted our invitation to be here and to talk to us. Again, I'm such a fan of yours, and to be able to sit down and chat with you and pick your brain about your book and your creative process or your creative process and your creativity was really, really cool. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
Thanks.